All right, we are back here on the podcast. October is here, and while there's still playoff baseball going on here, we are getting ready for the start of the hockey season here. This week, the NHL drops the puck on its latest 82 game season. Joining me today to help break it all down, he's come our hockey guy on the podcast. He's the host of the Sports in the Waiting Room podcast. Christopher Russo is here. Christopher, how are you?
I'm all right, thanks, Mike. Again, appreciate you having me back on. It is funny as we got playoff baseball going on right now to be on here, but yeah, I'm like a month into my hockey season already. So
Yeah, it's wild because it sneaks up on you because you're in the football mode, and then you got the playoff baseball. And you're like, oh wait, hockey's back.
yeah, well, I mean, I'm at least lucky enough that I can do like literally the EHL and the NAHL, EHLP and the NA3, and they all start in September. But like legitimate regular season games start in
Yep.
September. And so I probably had a week between my last day working with the Blue Claws, doing production room camp for them, and then going to 87s, or well, actually the Titans had the opener first. I probably had less than a week off between my summer and my winter sports.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts here. Think about it. And the pros of the NHL had some time off here. The Rangers not as much as everybody else because obviously they go to the conference finals last year. They lose after being the President's Trophy winners. They cannot fulfill the promise of this season here. We've seen in recent memory some of these President's Trophy winners have like a bit of a fall off next season because they put all that work in. It's so hard to get the energy to get back to that point here. Like, what do you think the Rangers do as an encore here if you do a President's Trophy kind of season?
Well, I think it's not necessarily that they got better. I think Florida got worse. I think that's actually the most important thing that needed to happen for them because I said last year, Florida was the one team you did not want to play. Florida was the one team you didn't want to play. Tampa Bay was the one team you did not want to play back in 2015. The Devils were the one team you did not want to play in 2023. It's always they run into that one team that can get right past them. But I think the most important thing this year for them is going to have to be zone exit. Because that was the one thing that Florida did very, very well was just harass the puck carrier. That was a huge thing. That's the one thing you're going to have to do this year is be better than Florida. I know there's always going to be another team, but there has to be some sort of consistent brand of hockey. So zone exit's going to be huge, and I think a maybe a bounce back season for Mika Zibanejad at 5-on-5 and on the power play. Just in terms of goal scoring, really, that's going to have to be the big thing. But I don't see them having a huge drop off this year.
Yeah, that's for sure. Interesting here. And they were very active in the offseason here. Like they made some moves, try and clear some salary space. They waived Barkley Goodrow. He ends up getting picked up by the Sharks. They had the whole Jacob Trouba saga where there was speculation, like we want the trade list. The trade doesn't end up happening. There was rumors that there were unhappiness on both sides of how this is handled. Rangers do end up bringing in Riley Smith to be the top right line winger. That Capo Caco is back. They retained Chad Ruhwedel as their seventh defenseman. They made a couple moves. Sam Carrick comes in to sort of fill the Goodrow slot here. What do you think the Rangers did in the offseason?
I think they I think they know they're right there and they don't have to do necessarily that much to retool. Because again, while the performance in the conference finals was clearly underwhelming, they know they were within, technically, they were within what? Technically within 2 goals of going to the Stanley Cup final because they kept losing 1 goal games in that series. They were right there. And a lot of that is Igor Shesterkin, I know, but they contained Florida a good amount, probably more than some major hockey fans would have expected. I think the Carrick move is probably good because he's, not a high scoring player, but he got to the final last year with Edmonton, came within a goal of hoisting the Stanley Cup. He's a good defensive forward. You look at a guy like Riley Smith, obviously that was their biggest pickup because he's incredibly versatile. He's a good scorer. He won the Stanley Cup in Vegas. He's a guy who can bring skill and play on, be that winger that Zibanejad and Kreider really need. He can also play the power play. He can also play the PK. He's bounced all around the league. Good in the locker room. That's the dressing room. That's one way they really replace Goodrow, and they'll be fine there. And it's understandable why they cut his contract. It made sense financially to do so, even for what he was able to bring them. So I think they're going to be okay. And then you got a handful of defensemen. The big issue was the big scapegoat last year. Not to say he was the only person who let you down, but the big scapegoat in the playoffs was Jacob Trouba. And again, there was the whole thing where it seems like his wife is still in school. I think she's getting her nursing degree. I believe
I
that's
think
what it is.
I think she's completing her residency this year.
That's it. So she's completing her residency, and that's pretty much why they have to stay. And so it's sort of a marriage of convenience right now between the Rangers and Jacob Trouba. But I think what both sides are going to have to understand is that there is a mutual appreciation. And ultimately, you're just going to have to enjoy this year as much as possible just to see if you can still reach your goal because it is still very achievable. So I think overall they didn't go too over the top, but they are. I think there are a few defensemen that will be able to lighten the load a bit for Trouba, maybe sort of defenseman by committee. I'd like to see if Ruido gets more minutes. He was a really good pinching defenseman for Pittsburgh early in his career, and so that would be something. But biggest thing for them is actually going to be probably seeing what happens with guys like Brett Berard and Brennan Othman, and finally giving them a legitimate chance.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And obviously they have a lot of this might be the last real shot with this group because they have a lot of decisions to make next offseason. The biggest one hanging over them right now is Igor Shesterkin, who's on a barking contract. He's gonna be a unrestricted free agent next summer. The sides have been talking as of recording time, but Shesterkin's made it pretty clear that like once we get to opening night, if there's no deal, I'm not talking till the end of the season here. So why do you think this cloud of the Shesterkin thing hanging over the ring is going to be like? Because obviously, like he wants a lot of money, he wants to be the highest paid goalie in the league, and there's a certain amount of guys that have to pay. It can make a very tricky balancing act for Chris Drury and company.
Yeah, he's not going anywhere. I don't think the Rangers can necessarily win or at least be on the level of success that they have been at or can be without him. And I think he knows he's going to stay in New York. I think he knows that he is the heir to maybe the greatest line of succession you've had between two goaltenders in recent memory, if not in NHL history, for what the pace he is on. Because you have Henrik Lundqvist, who I'd argue is a top three goaltender of all time. You have Shesterkin, who has won the Vezina already and has become one of the rare few to do so. He's probably still the top goaltender in the league. You can make that argument. And I think he knows he's going to stay. He knows he's going to be on that stage, but he also knows that he's going to be able to make a lot of money and he's going to be able to make the most money in New York. There's no doubt about that. Now, the question is whether he will be willing to budge just enough that Chris Drury can still balance the budget. It's funny. When I was in eighth grade, I wrote a paper on Moneyball, and while it did not get a good grade, one of the good things that I did note from Billy Beane is that you don't want to necessarily be, unfortunately, this aged well. You don't want to necessarily have the budget of an Oakland, but you don't necessarily want to have the budget of a New York where you are automatically paying everybody everything because you know that they can pay you. The ideal thing is to be like St. Louis, be the Cardinals, where you have a perfect middleman budget. People know your means, and so that's the issue with having to pay Shesterkin when you're the New York Rangers. You know you can pay him more than anyone else can. But I don't think there's a doubt in my mind that he's sticking around. And I think on top of that, he's still going to be able to play at his best this year, knowing that he's playing for that contract.
Yeah, I think with that was more of an issue. I don't think it's the money; it's just about like percentage of the cap because the cap is going up here. They still have to figure out deals for Lafreniere and Keandre Miller, who both are on. I think like they're both. I think they're both on bridge contracts to some degree. You have to figure out right wing one again next year if Riley's just a free agent. You have guys aging like Panarin and Trocheck are getting years older. Cryer's getting older. Like it's a tricky balance because you want to restock the cover. You either have to like pay up and hope that some of your young kids can sort of like fill slots on the third and fourth lines cheaply, or are you letting him go and trying to balance the whole roster differently, which is not the thing I don't think they want to do.
Yeah, I think that's understandable. Well, look, you can't maintain success forever. If you're in the NHL, you can be grateful that you won the cup once in a certain window. And that's what the Rangers came very close to doing so many times in that window, a very, very extended window, probably really about 10, 11 years when they had Henrik Lundqvist. And they got to the final, they got to the conference final a number of times, but they just couldn't get over the top. And that's something you've seen with the Rangers time and time again. You've seen with teams that just are the best teams that haven't won the cup in that stretch. The Rangers were there and they've been there for a little bit. The Sharks were like that for a long, long time with Jumbo Joe and Patrick Marleau and Joe Pavelski and all those guys. And so it's a matter of being able to finish. So if you just win once, you'll be grateful for the opportunity at that point. And then Tampa, you have Tampa who was able to hold that window a little bit longer, which seems like an anomaly at this point. But if the Rangers can win one, it'll be all worth it.
Yeah, the old saying, flags fly forever. All right. Let's go to the Devils side here. And obviously, there was a lot of changes after they flamed out last year when they thought they opened the window. They ended up missing the playoffs entirely. We have a new coaching staff. We have a bunch of new moves here. So let's start with the new coach here, Sheldon Keefe. So obviously, Toronto lets him go after they could not build on their playoff win a year ago. He's now in charge of New Jersey. Like, I feel like this could be a good move for the Devils. I feel like Sheldon Keefe getting out of the Toronto pressure will be a very successful coach for them.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually, you bringing that up, because you are in the largest market in North America, or at least in English speaking North America, but ultimately you're probably with the third most covered team within that market out of the three. It's still a very successful team. You will still get significant media coverage, but even though it's not the largest city, Toronto is the largest hockey market, the toughest media to deal with as someone in a hockey organization. And so for him to go to the Devils is probably a breath of fresh air. Now, I don't know if he is the guy for them, if he's the guy who's going to get the job done in terms of putting them over the top and winning the whole thing. But I think he is. And look, I honestly, I think Devils fans really put way too much blame on Lindy Ruff. I think he got far too much of that share. But I will say, I think Sheldon Keefe is a breath of fresh air for them and vice versa, because he's a younger guy. He's coached for only 5 years in the NHL, as opposed to Ruff, who had coached for, well over a quarter century. And then you have the fact that he's dealt with, look, Jack Hughes, I wouldn't say is on the level of an Austin Matthews, but he's dealt with superstars like Austin Matthews, and to a lesser extent Mitch Marner. He knows how to deal with them, to get along with them, and he can deal with younger guys because he also was an AHL coach. He was an AHL coach only 5 years ago. So that's a huge thing, I think, just from a personality standpoint, not necessarily from an actual X's and O's standpoint, but from a personality standpoint, he's going to be able to do more. And even for what the Leafs are trying to do, which is finally get over the hill and finally win the Stanley Cup and end the longest drought for the first time in, after this year, it would be 58 years. He was at least able to do something that no coach had done since 2004, which is get the Leafs to the second round. Even though the expectations were far higher, clearly he was able to do something more. And so I think a little pressure is taken off of him coming here to New Jersey. I think you should have a lot more faith in him here.
Yeah, and obviously they make a lot of moves personnel-wise here. They finally solved the goalie issue by trading for Jacob Markstrom prior to the draft. They get up a draft pick and a player, and they get an aging Markstrom here. But like after the hoops the Devils have gone through in goal in net the last few years, I feel like their fans be very happy to have Jacob Markstrom.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point with the aging. That's probably the thing that comes to the back of my mind, is that he's 34. He's probably going to be technically a little past his prime, but he is still an A1 goaltender. He was a Vezina Trophy finalist very recently. He is not that far past his peak necessarily. And the key thing is, if the Devils have a stronger defensive core this year, which it seems like they should, Dougie Hamilton should be healthy, he will be able to do more. He is the guy they have been waiting for, the consistent goaltender they've been waiting for. He's still an A1 guy, should be able to get them where they want to go. And yeah, he's not a long-term solution necessarily with someone that age, but they didn't give up that much for him. I don't think they gave up as much for him as I thought they were going to give. But yeah, it was definitely a good move for them. Undoubtedly the best move of the offseason for them.
Yeah, that's without a doubt. They also made a bunch of other moves in the offseason. The big one being Brett Pesce coming on the 6-year deal. Stefan Nason, they bring him over. They raid Carolina again. And obviously the big veteran name Tomas Tatar for add a winger to this group here. Like, what do you think about the other moves the Devils made?
Well, I think, bringing back Tatar and Nason was pretty significant. Pesci is an interesting one because he is someone who is not the most offensive minded defenseman. He'll get you probably 20, 25 points, but he is a very good plus minus defenseman. That's the biggest thing. And he's very reliable in terms of games played. Not this past year, but last year, he played every game of the season for Carolina. Very reliable presence, very steady presence. Guy who's been to the conference final before, was there for a very, very strong Carolina team, been more consistent the last few years, obviously, than the Devils have been. And so he is a big pickup. And you're hoping, if you're a Devil fan, that he can, much like I said about things with Trouba, can really take the load off of Dougie Hamilton, who was killed with injury last year, riddled with injury last year, whereas he'd had set a Devils record with 20 goals by a defenseman the year before. So that's going to be huge with a core that's not necessarily deep.
Yeah, it's true here. And obviously, there's a lot of pressure on this Devils team, too, because we thought after they beat the Rangers 2 years ago in the playoffs, oh, like they're here. They're early scheduled. They have a very talented young core. They're a superstar in Jack Hughes. And then everything falls flat last year, and they just don't never get going and miss the playoffs. And Hughes misses a bunch of time here. Like, I feel like this team should be a playoff team here, but like, how worried would you be about what happened last year carrying over?
If I were the Devils, I wouldn't be particularly worried. You see the change in coaching, you see the injury bug they dealt with last year. With, Hamilton was just the tip of the iceberg. But you look at all of that, and there's a lot of good things going for this team. There's a reason they made the playoffs the year before. I personally thought that with that Rangers series, they outmatched the Rangers. They matched up very well against them, but that sometimes happens. And I think they were also just kind of ahead of schedule in terms of the trajectory on which they wanted to be and probably needed to be for the development of this team. I think people might have expected them to make the playoffs. I don't think people necessarily expected them to get home ice in the first round and win a playoff series and even take a game from Carolina. So I think they're going to be fine. I was kind of concerned last year on the Devils' behalf that they didn't give Akira Schmid a real shake. I don't think they gave him a fair shake last season because he is the primary reason they advanced to the second round against Carolina. They very well could have lost in 4 or 5 games to the Rangers. I've mentioned this on the podcast multiple times. Akira Schmid stood on his head in games 3 and 4 at the Garden, and he's a huge reason why they advanced. I thought he might be their franchise goalie, and obviously he's much younger than Jacob Markstrom. So it's a question of who are they going to trust as their backup goaltender, and who do they trust, God forbid, Markstrom goes down. But no, 2 years ago was not a fluke whatsoever. It was just kind of an appetizer with maybe just a very long break in between courses for what the devil meal could be.
Yeah, let's go to our third team in the area, the Islanders here, who, again, with the way that Lou Lamoriello built them, they're kind of like tied to this group that was successful a few years ago. Now seems to be winding down its window. They make one move really of significance to bring Anthony Duclair in to add a little more pop to their lineup here. Some of the fourth line stalwarts are now gone. So, like, this feels like, to me, this is sort of like this is like the last chance saloon for the Islanders here, where it feels like they're running to a point here where, but the contractors are what they are. They can't really move much here. They don't have many assets left. It feels like this is a point where I feel like the window might be closed on the Islanders. Would you agree with that?
To an extent, yes, it probably is closed. I feel like we've been saying for the last 2 or 3 years that the window has closed, but I mean, they still made the playoffs last year. They still took, was it 1 or 2 games from Carolina?
I think they got
There's
one.
something there. They got one. There's still something there. The truth is, I mean, say what you will about the Maple Leafs, the Islanders might be the most desperate team to win the Stanley Cup, considering what they've been through over the last few years, what they have built. And I think, look, you can give Lou Lamoriello all the flack you want, but I thought he actually did a really good job with this squad. I didn't understand the Barry Trotz firing whatsoever, but it is what it is. And then you fire Lane Lambert and kind of go with an odd move and bringing back Patrick Waugh, obviously a guy who's very successful, but has a temper to him, has been out of the NHL for a while as a head coach. The Anthony Duclair move is a good pickup because he's a guy who is skilled, but not a superstar necessarily. They can get him for a little cheaper. He has bounced all over the league. He's played in this area before. He played for the Rangers for the very early part of his career and has been to a cup final before. Was not with the Florida team that won the cup, but was there last year when they got to the cup final and lost to Vegas. So he's a very good presence in that dressing room, and he might be the guy to push back a little against Waugh, or one of the guys who can push back a little against Waugh, especially when you figure, they've broken down some of that aging core a little bit. Matt Mark is, I think, a free agent right now, and it doesn't look like he's going to be coming back. But this team has gotten a little younger. And the truth is, look, Matt Barzal is maybe to a lesser extent, maybe not to a Jack Hughes level or an Austin Matthews level, obviously McDavid level. He is a superstar in this league. He's a very skilled player. He is the face of this organization. They still have a great goaltender in Ilya Sorokin. And so this is a team that could still very well compete. Do I think they're winning the Stanley Cup this year? No. Am I ruling it out? No, not at all. So it's, can Waugh keep himself in check, and can they just stay healthy, and can Duclair meld with them? So anything is possible.
Yeah, anything is possible here at the Islanders here. And obviously now Patrick Waugh gets the full year with the Islanders, and we know he's had success elsewhere, but he also has the style that can wear thin with players here. Why he was out of the league for a few years for Lou Lamoriello plucks him off the street to coach the team. So what do you think a full season of Patrick Waugh does to the Islanders?
Well, look, I think, especially considering, what this team was down the stretch last year, I don't think hiring Waugh necessarily turned them from a non-playoff team into a playoff team. I think they already were a playoff team. I think they would have made it with Lane Lambert anyway. But Waugh this iteration of Waugh doesn't seem as frustrated or ill-tempered as the one that was in Colorado that was, shoving plexiglass against Bruce Boudreau. So I think he has understood. I think he's learned a lot of things since getting let go from that job and working in the minors for a bit. And to be back here, I think it's going to be okay. I think they're going to be all right. It's just a matter of being able to meld with him for a full year through training camp, through the preseason. It's going to be very interesting to watch, but I think Islander fans should have some faith in him.
All right, let's quickly go around the league a little bit because obviously there were a lot of crazy player movements in the offseason. I mean, Nashville built a super team of like former superstars. We had Jake Gensel stun Carolina and go to Tampa. We replaced Steven Stamkos, who goes to Nashville. We had a whole ass team move from Arizona to Utah. We still don't know what the team's actually called, or the Utah Hockey Club this season here. Like, what storylines popped out to you from the offseason?
I think the Nashville super team is going to be a huge thing. Arizona, Gensel going to Tampa is definitely an interesting thing because Tampa is another one that is kind of similar to the Islanders where, I mean, look, I'm not ruling anything out, but it seems like their window is closed as well to win the Stanley Cup. So it might be a lateral move. I still think Carolina, I've said for a while, I think Carolina is an A1 goaltender away from winning the Stanley Cup. I've said that for a few years now, but that's one of them. Arizona, I think Utah getting a hockey team is pretty cool, pretty interesting. I just wish that they had put an actual name on it. And I've also seen videos of how it's honestly reminded me of when the Islanders played at Barclays, because I'm seeing these videos where people can't see the ice in its entirety from certain areas of the building. That's the building that's built for basketball. It was the same thing with Barclays Center. I'm half expecting to see a Honda Pilot situated in the corner of the rink, and so that's going to be very difficult. But I hope they do build up a good fan base there. It does seem like a place that should be a pretty strong hockey town, pretty strong hockey state. I'm very disappointed that it looks like there's not going to be an expansion team in Arizona at this point because they're not going to get that deal done. So I feel bad for the people of Arizona, just the same way I feel bad for the people of Oakland who have lost so much. We're talking about the A's as of late, and them losing their club, losing 3 teams in 4 years. And so for Arizona to lose a hockey team, you might think, oh, they draw so few people. It doesn't mean you don't have fans. They had a lot of fans. When they got to the conference final against the Kings, I mean, that place was electric 12 years ago. So there is something there. I don't think there should be more than 32 teams, but there's something there in Arizona. Definitely, it's at some point. I don't think you're getting a metroplex. That I don't think I'm not that delusional, but I think that's true. And look, I mean, it's on a more somber note, but one of the things that I think we have to bring up is Johnny Gaudreau over the summer, Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau over the summer, losing both of them. And I'm going to be very interested to see what the Blue Jackets are going to be this year. Because the truth, look, just from a hockey standpoint, I thought they were not that far off from being a playoff team last year. I thought they were on a very good trajectory, and I think they still could be. But it's how is leadership going to respond on the ice, and how is Sean Monahan going to deal with being there when the draw of going there was to be with Johnny Gaudreau? That's going to be a very difficult thing. I can tell you from a personal standpoint, two of the leagues I cover, both teams I cover, both have teams in their league who play in Hollydale in South Jersey, Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau's home rink, and look, it's tough for the people of Philly too. I don't know about the Flyers organization, but it's tough for people down there too. But the Blue Jackets organization in particular, that's going to be really fascinating to see how they handle this year.
Yeah, a couple of things I'll touch on here too. The Arizona situation, it feels like that's just a bad owner spot where like I think Marullo was just not the right fit for the market. He didn't have the acumen to get what needed to be done. And I do think that Utah Blizzard would have been a great name. That's my vote. I wish they would take that one. And I think we're gonna end up in an era eventually where like we get more teams added. I feel like eventually they're gonna end up at 36. So I feel like Arizona will be in the mix at that point with a different ownership group because remember, we don't get guys like Austin Matthews in the NHL if we don't have hockey in the Southwest.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You look at a guy like Shane Doan and what he did for that city, for that state. It makes perfect sense. I get scared when I think of I don't like change, but I don't. 36 teams just sounds kind of crazy, but if that's the case, there better be a team in Quebec City because that is long overdue. And also, if it's Utah, I would like to see the Yetis, and I want the mascot to be. I want the logo to be the Yeti from Monsters Inc. Hey, we got snow cones. I'd like to see that guy. So if we're gonna single it out.
Yeah, we'll figure out here. And well, it's a little early, obviously. We're talking beginning of October here, but season started. Let's get some picks on record here. Who do you have going to the Stanley Cup final?
I know I could. I know I could say the Rangers, but it does seem almost ridiculous to think that Florida will regress that much. So I'm going to say that Florida goes back. And this may be like an overly popular pick, but I will say this because even though I said Dallas last year, and I don't know if they're ever going to, get over the top when I expect them to. I don't know if Edmonton's going to be that good. I didn't expect them to get to the final last year. I'm going to say Nashville is going to go to the final because obviously they got way better. And on top of that, they were a team that exceeded my expectations in the first place and it nearly upset Vancouver in the first round last year anyway. I actually picked them to win that one. So Florida, Nashville, it's all Southeast.
Yeah, so you were all in on the super team.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, that's where I'm going.
Yeah, I'm gonna take the Rangers to get to the Cup final. I feel like this is a team. I feel like that people I don't think are going to expect as much of them after the President's Trophy year and some of the losses they had. So I think there'll be less pressure on them than what they would have had. So I feel like that will help them. They'll get to the final. Out west, I'm gonna say Colorado gets back. I mean, we've heard rumors right now that Landeskog might finally come back after 2 years on long-term IR. They have a very good talent base there. They had a disappointing run of the playoffs last year, but like maybe that they're a little fresher for spring hockey, and then they're ready to go and get to that final.
If that guy captains a team to the final after missing essentially 2 years, that's going to be one of the great personal comebacks in the history of the league.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun to see that happens, Chris. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. People want to follow what you're up to in terms of social media and your pod. How can they do that?
Yeah, you can find me on X at Chris Russo 98, CHRISRUSSO. And you can find me on Instagram at Chris Russo, I believe it's Chris Russo 1998. There's also an underscore 1998. I'm trying to remember which profile is which is the one you can find my podcast and which you can't.